live session. Before we begin, we'd like to introduce ourselves. I'm Gaelle Blake, and I've been working for Hays since 1999 when I joined as a trainee recruitment consultant in our construction and property business. I currently head up our permanent appointments team and our construction and property business across the UK and Ireland.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeff Taylor. I started my career in London with Hays back in 1995, as Gaelle did as a trainee consultant. And I'm now a director based out of the northwest of the UK, and I'm responsible for offices including the likes of Preston, Carlisle, Burnley, Lancaster and Wigan. So it gives me very great pleasure to thank you all for joining us. And over the next 30 to 40 minutes, Gaelle and I, we're going to be live across LinkedIn, across Facebook and across YouTube. And we're going to be taking you through some top tips on how to make your career thrive in a hybrid working world. So first of all, let's understand what it is that we mean by hybrid working, or as some organisations refer to it as blended working, or as we call it in Hays, balanced working. So in simple terms, hybrid working model involves a combination of remote or semi-remote or entirely office-based employees, potentially working to different scheduled hours. The structure might vary on a day-to-day basis, and if you're in an office, you may be working alongside different colleagues at any given time, or indeed, as we do in our larger offices, working in a shift pattern here at Hays. What's important to note is that the amount of flexibility within a hybrid working model is going to differ hugely between different organisations. We're working with employers, some of whom are working completely flexibly, and you can choose the days that you'd like to be in an office. Some employers are actually sticking to more rigid structures with, for example, say 2 days working at home and 3 days working in the office. And I've actually got some employers who've gone the whole hog and decided to go entirely remote, and they're closed their offices completely and operating a fully remote working model. Hybrid working is going to change the world of work. We all know this, even more so with the changes that we've seen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We recently asked, as part of our What Workers Want survey report, whether or not people think the traditional 9-to-5 office-based ways of working will return in the future. And as you can see, the jury is still out, with 35% of people said that yes, they think 9-to-5 will return, whereas 31% say they don't think it's going to return, and there's about 34% of people who are still sat on the fence.
And it's quite interesting, actually, how what we think is going to happen in the short term also differs from what employers and employees think is going to happen in the long term. In the short term, when we ask people around what they think will happen from July 2021 onwards, you can see how almost their answers were affected by what restrictions they thought might still be in place. So you can see that actually in some ways employers have been a little bit more optimistic about the hybrid solution, or balanced working as you might want to call it. Whereas actually you look at employees and they're thinking they might be more based in the office than at the moment. We then asked in the same report, we asked employers and employees what they thought was going to happen in the longer term. And this was really interesting because overall, the majority of employers are intending to offer some form of hybrid working across those broader timeframes. Interestingly, though, 29%, that's almost a third, don't believe they'll offer it in any timescales, and 22% are therefore still unsure about what they're going to offer.
Okay, we're going to carry on. There's a couple of technical difficulties, but we're going to get things back live again, which it looks like they are. So whilst not all job roles can be undertaken in a hybrid way, we know that there's lots of advantages to those that can, and those advantages can include the potential for increased focus and productivity by having the flexibility to choose depending on how you work best. You're potentially going to maximize how productive you can be. For example's sake, with myself, I undertake most of my managerial one-to-ones when I'm working from home. It's far less disturbed, and I can get far more done in my one-to-one times. Also, for further benefits can be improved work-life balance and reduced stress, particularly the stress of a busy commute in and potential late returns home. That can be mitigated, at least partially, by the hybrid working model. And again, being commute-free means I can potentially start my role earlier in the mornings, and indeed make sure that I'm home to have something to eat with the kids at night time. And an increased engagement and autonomy, having greater autonomy and being trusted to manage your own working style means that you're much more likely to engage productively with the projects that you're assigned to.
If you're working in a hybrid way already, or you're planning to, it's important to work with your manager to create a working effectively, regardless of location. As hopefully you can see on the screen, here's some top tips for setting up your hybrid working structure and what it could look like. If your employer has been keen in asking you to come in the office, let's say 3 days a week, and you're sticking to this, however, if you're allowed to set your own days in the office, it's important you agree when and where you'll be available. I know in my mind, I'm clear about which location I'm most effective in for different tasks. I like to go in the office to collaborate with colleagues, and at home, I'm better doing more precise work. So just a summary of the points: have a discussion with your manager on what your typical day, week or month should look like. Agree regular hours. You'd be expected to be online and meetings. Ensure you have access. I think this one's really important, to everyone's calendar, so you know when they're available to talk. And I know when you're planning meetings, this is really important. And identify which tasks you would be better suited to doing in the workplace. Personally, for me, that's the collaboration side. And then remotely, and for me, I know that's when I'm doing my close, concentrating work.
So in order to make sure work is recognised and you can make the most of what hybrid working offers, communication is key. And that's something we've really focused on in Hays in the last 12 or 18 months. Opportunities to connect with people become less informal and need to be more formally structured. Even formalising the informal, actually diarising, having fun with your colleagues. And I think, Gaelle, you've been doing something along this line recently.
Yeah, I mean, for me, as I was saying, what I've really liked about what I've needed, if I'm honest, is to meet with people face to face. But what I've also know is, and I've really thought about this a lot more since lockdown actually, is well-being and getting out there and getting into fresh air. So what I've tried to do is actually combine the two things together, which is getting well-being, getting outside, but also meeting colleagues face to face. You know, I love this sort of communication, but it's always lovely to see someone face to face. So I've been going on walks, I've been going on wellbeing runs, I've been going on wellbeing bike rides with my colleagues. And I think that helps to deepen and strengthen those relationships. And you can still talk about work the whole.
Okay, so just picking up from Gaelle's side, that was a case of she's spending far more time communicating on a personal one-to-one basis, albeit socially distanced, and engaging with her colleagues as much as you possibly could in a personal or one-to-one basis. It's important to discuss with your manager the strategies you are going to use to ensure that you are clearly and effectively communicating with your colleagues, regardless of where they're based, be it in home or be it in the office. It can be a struggle at first to get the right balance of communication when you're working part from the office and partly remotely as well. And sometimes you might feel like you're over-communicating. So as you can see on the screen, we've shared some of our wins. So taking your time to consider what method of communication works best for this particular message you're looking at delivering. Stay consistent and don't bombard your colleagues with different methods of communication, such as emails 1 minute and Teams the next and instant chats the other. Video calls can quite easily take over. We've probably all heard of Teams fatigue. It's something that we're quite conscious of here at Hays. So be mindful of scheduling multiple meetings one after the other and establish clear objectives, desired outcomes, and an agenda for every meeting. And one of the particular tips I use is at the end of the Teams meeting, make sure you organise in a little bit of gap time. You need to just get some thoughts together, 5 or 10 minutes after each meeting. And then finally, don't be afraid to make it clear when you aren't available for calls or for meetings outside of your work hours. Just because you're working flexibly doesn't mean that you are always switched on to a work mode. So I'm going to pick up on Gaelle here because I think she's got a couple of communication issues. So once you've established the basics in terms of your routine and communication, it's important to think about how you will maintain your personal development in a hybrid working world. The implementation of a new hybrid working practice doesn't mean that your personal development should be put on pause or that all of the hard work should go unnoticed. The fact is that working effectively in a hybrid model may require you to develop new skills or refocus on the existing ones you've already fine-tuned. So you should be prepared to have an honest discussion with your manager about what these might be. And here's some steps that you can take to make sure that your development is still front of mind. Set aside some time to reflect on your current skill set and the potential areas where you need to develop. Ask your employer or your manager to address development needs you have identified through formal learning or on-the-job training or coaching and mentoring. Ensure your performance objectives are realistic, achievable, and have meaningful performance indicators that are in line with your working arrangements. And don't let regular reviews slip. This is key. If you are working in a different location to your manager, ask your manager for regular catch-ups and feedback on your performance. So really important to making hybrid working practices work for you is the ability to be critical and honest with yourself regarding the ways in which you believe you work the best. Thinking critically about how you produce your best ideas. Is it through discussion with others, or is it the best that your best work is done when you're quietly reflecting sat at home? This may help you ascertain where you should be spending the majority of your time. For example, sake, in my role, early time of the day, it's very, very busy. It's not a good time, but I need to do some lateral thinking, so I will plan that later on in the day. Reflect on how you design your time. Do you prefer working in short bursts or in long stretches, as this may help you assess how to structure your working hours, particularly if you're working from home. Consider how your mood is affected by where you're working. Do you find the buzz and the liveliness of the office workplace inspires you and makes you more productive? Or do you find you often feel overwhelmed in that environment? Or do you find working from home can bring on feelings of isolation? Or do you appreciate the solitude? Over the course of the next 3 to 6 months, it will be a huge test for us all on how hybrid or blended or balanced working will work en masse. So don't be afraid if you come across bumps in the road. Certainly here at Hayes, we're learning as we're going. We've got a load of learns that we've had across the last 12 or 18 months, but absolutely we are still learning ourselves. So be honest with your manager. Do you feel like you need more time working remotely or in the office? If your hybrid working arrangement is that you're only going to be in an office for 1 or 2 working days a week, you need to be mindful about how visible you're going to be when you're working remotely. So when working remotely and connected via the likes of Zoom or Team or other online functions, it's often easy to miss all of that vital nuancing, all of that non-verbal communication that gives context and depth to communications. You need to make sure that you stay visible when working remotely, just as much as you would do in the office. And here's some advice to think about. Be engaging and bring ideas, and don't be afraid to have a voice during virtual meetings. In these meetings, keep your focus. Don't work on other tasks. It's quite obvious when people have got that blank look and they're clearing emails. So please, please, please focus on the task at hand, and that's taking part in the meeting. Organise virtual coffees and teas with your colleagues, because it's hard to replicate those water cooler moments. So schedule time to catch up with colleagues who might be on a different schedule to you. And then shout about your success, just as you might do when you're physically based in an office when something has gone well. Make sure that you tell your manager.
As we've mentioned in this session, although some companies are working remotely or in a hybrid way before the pandemic, the majority weren't. So there's going to be lots of learns along the way. In order to help your employer on what might or might not be working, make sure to feed back to them. Highlight whether or not you're getting the support you require. If you feel you're not getting enough help or being provided with the skills or learning or opportunities that you need to succeed, make sure you feed this back to your manager and ask your colleagues too for insights. There's strength in numbers, and helping them to make a hybrid model work is everyone's collective responsibility. Before speaking to your manager regarding any changes or improvements that could be made to the working policies, collect testimony together and any insight for your colleagues that you think might help your case, and perhaps feedback as a team. It's everyone's right to be able to work in an environment where your well-being is looked after, and it's essential that you take active steps to make this a priority and ask for help if you're struggling. With teams and colleagues working in different places, it becomes slightly more difficult to check in on each other, and you may find the boundaries between your professional and personal life are blurring, or you could feel isolated. When you are working in a hybrid way, some pointers to check in on your well-being: take breaks, actively stop for lunch. I know I really try to do this. Stick to your agreed working hours as you can. And ensure that you get out for regular exercise. One of the things I've made sure I've done this particularly myself. Check in with your colleague as frequently as you can, preferably face-to-face or on a video call, whatever you can do. And I know that seeing a colleague's face when I'm chatting to them really helps me to feel more connected. Be aware of unconscious biases that may lead you to assume how someone is feeling or coping. Ensure that you always ask. In fact, I have to say, I don't just ask once. I tend to circle back and ask someone again. I think when we start a conversation, we often say to somebody, how are you? But that can be almost the start of a conversation. I think it's important a bit later on to go back and ask them again, how are you really? And often you get a different answer. So don't assume when you're checking in with colleagues. Also, take the time to reflect on your achievements and successes at the end of the day. Even small wins are worth celebrating. And it's good to remember that what you're doing matters. I know that for myself, I always tend to do a win, a learn, and a change at the end of every day, so that I'm constantly acknowledging what I've done, but also I'm thinking about how I can improve for the next day. And Jeff talked about this earlier, about this whole idea around commuting effectively, as it were, that some of us now, when we're not in the office, have this extra time for ourselves. So it's tempting just to add that onto your working day and get more work done. But also the other thing about commuting, of course, is we get downtime. That's what we're doing when we're commuting. So think about how you can use that time. Maybe you can go for a walk around the garden, just so that you make sure that by the end of the working day, you've kind of come down a few levels before you're then ready to sort of kind of go back into your home life.
Lovely, thanks, Gaelle. So once you've got your hybrid working arrangement sorted, we've got loads of tools here at Hays to take your career to the next level. So if you go onto our My Learning offering, it's a free offering, so it's a fantastic. You sign up and get access to various bits of collateral to help support your career development. So latest insights into the skills in demand and career trends, access to courses that are going to enable you to reskill and upskill, and then securing new opportunities in the competitive and consistently evolving world of work documents as well. Some really interesting stuff in there. And then you can also visit our Inspire Me in the New Era of Work resource hub. That's a mouthful to say, where you can read all of our latest guides, articles and tips to help you drive your career and build your career even more. So we're going to move on to questions. Thank you all for sticking with us through our technical glitch at the start, but we do have some questions coming through. So Gaelle, you are driving the questions.
Yes. So Jeff, you can answer this first one. So do you have any advice on how best I can structure my week when hybrid working?
Well, we talked about it earlier in the presentation. First and foremost, understand what works for you best, either at home or what works for you best when you're in the office environments. For me, if I'm in the office environments and I need to interface with someone on an emotional level, that's when I would do that sort of work. If I can do something which is like my managerial one-to-ones, I would definitely do that based, because it's statistical and more factually based. I can do that working from home. That works really well for me. So I would focus on, personally, I would focus on what works best for you from home, what works best for you from the office. And certainly for me, less disruption happens for me at home.
It's kind of that self-awareness, isn't it, to know where you're best to do certain tasks. And I think we've all got those colleagues who can be really honest with you, as well as, and if you're not sure on yourself, you can always ask other people, where do you think I'm best doing this? And I think that's how you can kind of navigate this new world.
Absolutely.
So the next question is do you think the hybrid working will last and will change the way we work forever? Do you want me to do this one? Should I do this
You
one?
can answer that one, please do.
I find this fascinating. So I did as my degree, I did a history degree, and so I'm absolutely fascinated by the world of work and how it changes. And quite interestingly, very, very early on, I thought this is going to be the biggest change to the world of work since the Second World War. And I think ultimately, I think it will be. I think sociologically, it will be massive as to how this changes the way we work and the locations of where we work. So do I think this will change things? Yes, I really, really do. And that's not just my opinion. The Bank of England said exactly the same thing. So in November, the Bank of England looked forward and said, what did they think was going to happen? And they perceive that most people will now work from home either 2 or 3 days a week. So it's quite interesting. Do I think it will change? Yes, I do. Do I think we've worked out the best ways of working yet? No, I think we're on a journey, but I think it's an exciting journey to be on. Right, Jeff. So third question. What's your advice to avoid, over communicating when working from home?
Okay, firstly, make sure you've got a regular meeting set up, with either, your line manager or your peers or whoever it is that you need to communicate with. Just because you're working from home doesn't necessarily mean structure has to go out of the window. So I would absolutely make sure that there is a structure for when you communicate. And then we talked about over communicating a little bit earlier on. Don't feel obliged that you've got to copy everybody into every single message that you've got to deliver, because a lot of the time it will be deemed as noise and probably won't get digested. So make sure that you've got something diarised in. Don't let structure go out of the window. Make sure you've got some regular meetings plugged in, and be really conscious not to do stuff that you probably wouldn't do if you were going to be based in the office.
Cool. So another one, how can we ensure that people remain motivated when working remotely? So this is, do you want me to do this one, Jeff? Shall I start and then see if there's anything you want to add?
It's a great question.
So I think that it is a really great question. Actually, we've been asked this so many times, actually, because we've helped thousands of people start new jobs during the pandemic where they've not been able to actually meet their colleagues. My goddaughter started a new job in September with a big petrochemical company. She's never, ever, ever gone in the office or met her colleagues. She's only ever done it this way. So this is a real kind of, I think we're all facing this, aren't we? So I think ultimately it's about, I wonder if it is about what I was saying earlier, which is check in, but don't necessarily assume that the first answer is the right answer as to how they're doing. I think sometimes a pause and circling back and double checking how they really are doing. I think it is difficult in some ways to have the same culture as when you're actually seeing somebody, because when you see somebody, you can read their body language. Now, I appreciate on these calls, you can read my body language, some of my body language, but not all of my body language is available to be read. So it's difficult to pick on those micro expressions and those non-verbal cues. I mean, ultimately, if it's possible, then if you can go for a walk, meet for a walk or meet for a coffee, then outside, then that's great. But if not, I think it is about trying to just give some quality time. Think about which parts of your culture are really important and how can you almost create that water cooler moment, whether it's virtual coffees, as I think Jeff talked about earlier, virtual race nights, whatever it might be, to help that culture sort of breed. But I do think it's about that regular check-in and thinking about everything you'd like to do face-to-face and figure out if there's a better way to do it virtually in the meanwhile.
Can I just come in on the end of that?
Add to that?
Just the only other thing I'd add to that is, again, that your role shouldn't hugely change based on physically where you're actually working. So I think you've got to remember that people are motivated by different things, and one cap doesn't fit all in terms of motivation. So that's probably no different as it is when you're working physically side by side by someone. So I think that one cap fits all approach to motivation is something that should be at the forefront of everyone's mind, because one thing might be right for one person, but it most certainly won't be right for the other. So just flex as you would do working in the physical environment.
Love that. How effective do we think hybrid interviews are with Zoom compared with face-to-faces?
Another great question. Someone's reading the great questions book there. So how effective are virtual interviews in comparison to physical interviews? I think physical interviews for me will always be the ultimate thing we've got to do. You mentioned a couple of seconds ago, Gaelle, about reading people, body language. I don't think that can ever be fully replicated on a video function in comparison to a physical function. But there is real value in doing virtual interviews and doing interviews online. I think one of the things we've got to be really mindful of is that in the role that both you and I do, Gaelle, in terms of driving the permanent recruitment strategy across the UK for Hays, some employers don't see that a virtual interaction with a candidate is actually an interview. They see it as a step towards getting an interview.
Right, yeah.
Where I think you've got it's an incredibly busy market. It's a candidate-driven market. There's masses and masses of roles out there for professionals at the moment. So clients have to recognise that when they are interfacing with someone on a virtual basis, it actually is an interview in the candidate's eyes. That's something that we've learned over the last 6 or 9 months.
So, and just to add to that, so just picking what Jeff said in terms of those face-to-face, the interesting thing is, so when we looked at the statistics, we wondered what would happen. Would it start taking more interviews to almost for someone to get a job? Because as Jeff said, were our employers kind of trusting the face-to-faces? What's interesting is it did spike to start off with. We did see that the employers were wanting maybe the comfort blanket because they couldn't see someone face to face of almost interviewing them more times. So they sort of felt more comfortable. But actually it started to settle down, maybe as employers and employees have felt more comfortable, maybe because we're communicating like this in our personal lives as well as our professional lives. So as they've got more comfortable with this idea of interviewing like this, what we've noticed is it's settled down. And so now it's back to the same level of interviews it would take to get a job as it did pre-COVID. So as much as we all might have preferences that we prefer to see someone face to face, what we've noticed with Hays, with the thousands of people that we've placed during the pandemic, is actually it's now kind of settled back down, and actually employers are kind of, I guess, used to this new world now. So I think don't be worried as an employer or as an employee, but I completely agree with what Jeff's saying, is that we have noticed the market shifting. And I think this is great for both employers and employees because it speeds up the process. You can tend to fit in a video interview a lot easier than you can often physically. So I think a bit of both worlds is good. This is great. Thank you, by the way, for all these questions. We're getting loads of these, so thank you. So we have somebody else that's asked, do you have any tips for combating screen fatigue? Do you want me to start that one, Jeff? And then
please do. I've got one big thought on it, but yeah, please do.
Have you? So I have to say, and I can't say that this was my idea, but I have to say I did steal this from my colleague Karen Young, who looks after our finance business. Is I started noticing that she was starting meetings at 10 past the hour, and she was finishing meetings at 5 to the hour. And I noticed this because I started turning up to her meetings and be like, where's everybody else? Oh, right, okay, hang on, the meetings time's changed. And what was great was it allowed you that 15-minute downtime where you could just pull your thoughts together, kind of think about what it is that this meeting is going to be all about. And at the end of it, it allows you just to kind of refresh and just step back for 5 minutes before you start another meeting. So to me, I really understand, by the way, I really understand. So whoever's asked about the fatigue, I get it, I hear it, I feel it. For me, I would say maybe the gap, try and do the gap. But I know what you mean. You're constantly almost watching everyone's body language on your own all the time. So it is super tiring, isn't it? So JT, I'm sure you have some pearly gems. I just know you will.
It's just the one. So I think what we referred to in the presentation earlier on is that buffering zone. Build in a bit of buffering time at the end of meetings. So in terms of fatigue, the biggest piece I would do, where you can and appropriately, you've got to say no to some meetings, because I think there's an obligation when you're working remotely, in particularly, to click yes to meetings, because it's still reasonably new to us, the whole process, even though it's been with us for 12 or 18 months now. So I think my big bit of advice in terms of screen fatigue is don't feel obliged, sensibly and appropriately, to decline meetings if it's not an absolute necessity for you to be on, because there's only so much time you've got in the day. I think you need to be aware of that.
So we have some more questions. So again, thank you please keep them coming. So any tips on how to keep informal video meetings short and to the point?
Agenda. I think making sure you've got an agenda, absolutely key. There's real strong objectives in terms of what you want the meeting to be, but having a strict agenda and making sure you've got someone who can control your crowd as well is quite important. Gaelle, anything you'd add to that?
No, honestly, I think I think in some ways, actually, I think those video kind of meetings has almost helped to keep them shorter, because I think when you're face to face, it's harder to sort of be going, right, I need to go now. Whereas I think because we tend to use Teams at work, and it actually flashes up, there's 5 minutes left. And I think it makes people realise, actually, this meeting is going to end, I need to get on to the other one. But I think, as Jeff said, it's just looking at the time and saying, what I tend to do is to drop in, I do have another meeting in 10 minutes, or I have something else planned. And I think it just draws everyone back to the main purpose. But I think it's just reminding ourselves of what is the purpose of this meeting? Why am I attending it? What have I added and what have I taken away? And if I haven't got everything I needed, try and make sure you keep circling back to those main agenda points that Jeff talked about. So that'd be great. So I noticed, by the way, from some of the chat, so good luck to Elle, by the way, who's got an interview tomorrow, just as a general point, because I can see all the questions that are coming in. And this is actually asked by somebody else, but so anyone who's going on interviews, is the dress code the same for video interviews? What would you recommend when working from home? Shall I go for this one, Jeff?
Please do.
So really early on, and you'll be able to find this on the Hayes website. I recorded a podcast actually, because this was like such a big thing when we moved to video interviewing. People were asking all the time, how do I do it? What should I wear? How is it different? I think we've got a year under our belt now. So I know for us, we've arranged tens of thousands of video interviewing now, whereas we barely did any before. So I think it's quite interesting that this is, it used to be it wasn't a phenomenon before, now it is, and now we're all used to it. What I would say to you is, what would you wear on an interview? And if you would wear that for an interview, wear what you'd wear for a face-to-face interview, because you're still trying to achieve the same thing. It doesn't matter that you may have a screen in front of you or a person in front of you. You're still trying to impress somebody. You're still trying to explain, kind of bring your brand to that interview. It doesn't matter what the means of communication is. What is your purpose? Your purpose is to get a job. You want to be taken seriously. Therefore, what you wear should be the same regardless of whether you're in the office or not. What I'm wearing today would be the same whether I was in the office or not. So I think always remember that when it comes to interviews. It is just, what do you want your brand to be? And do your research. What do they all normally wear to work? If you go through a recruiter, they'll probably tell you. If it's a startup tech business, they might all be in t-shirts and jeans, in which case I'm sure that would be fine. For me, I'd always err on being overdressed than under, because I think ultimately you want to be as formal. You would rather be over formal than under formal. That's what I would say. Do you have anything else to add, JT?
Perfect answer that. No, absolutely spot on. Nothing to add to that.
Can I just give one other piece of advice, given that obviously we've had technical issues today ourselves, is if you can, check your broadband. I mean, I don't have my children at home today, so it's not them on the Wi-Fi, but I think ultimately just make sure that you, as much as you can, do make sure your Wi-Fi is clear, just so it's less stressful for you. The other thing is, as you would normally interview, turn all your phones off, and also be conscious when you're at home, what's behind you. So what is going to be in the camera frame? If you need to make sure that you put a sign on the door if you've got kids or teenagers around to say do not disturb, just so that you're in the right place when it comes to really focusing on the interview in hand. Just mentioning that. So I think that was the last question. I think that's the last question we've had. Thank you, everybody. I hope that's answered all the questions that people had. Good luck for any of you who are going on interviews. Good luck for those of you who are navigating the world of hybrid, a bit of working from home, a bit of working into the office. I'm sure we're looking to work effectively and see each other a bit more face to face. So, Jeff, is there anything more you wanted to add before we close? Ellie's not gone yet, but good luck for tomorrow, and make sure you keep the parrot quiet behind you, so her chat says so.
No, but thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Take care, everybody.